So MVC6 is simply the server-side framework that allows us to create views of code or data in a model view controller pattern. Model representing the data, view representing what we're returning back to the user, ordinarily HTML, or in the case of APIs, that might be data that we're sending back as a view, and then a controller that coordinates the interaction between them. A controller is what is normally executed immediately when a request comes into our web server, and that controller then determines what models we're going to use and how to render a view. Let's see this in practice. We're going to start by creating our controller class and then the view that is related to that controller class. We'll start by creating a new folder called controllers. In MVC6, we're going to have both controllers for an API as well as ones that return HTML in the form of web pages. So I'm going to create another folder in here to separate the two. Our web pages will be under another folder called web. And then in a later module, we'll go ahead and create the API using the same folder for controllers. So let's create our first controller by creating a new class in our web folder. And I'm just going to call this the app controller. I'm calling this the app controller because this is where we're going to expose most of our pages to our application. This particular application doesn't have that many pages, and so we don't have to separate them into different controllers. I'm going to just create one controller for brevity. And I'm going to put this in a namespace called the world, controllers, and web. I'm matching the namespaces to that folder structure. And here I can create a new class. I'm going to call app controller. And the app controller itself is going to have methods that are going to be called based on a pattern of a request coming in. And the default method here is going to be called index. And essentially what we're saying is that when a request comes into the root of our website, we're going to tell it that this is the method to be called when that request comes into the root. And we're saying that that request is called an index, and we'll see why that is in a minute, and it's going to return a view. Now MVC uses a conventional approach to finding this view. It looks for a folder called views, which I'll go ahead and add right now, and then looks for a folder based on the controller name. So we'll have a new folder called app. Notice that it doesn't include the word controller, it's simply the prefix to the word controller. And then in this folder we can create a new view. And views are just files that are named the same as the action that it's using. And in our case that will be index, and the extension is CS/HTML. This is for a type of file called a razor file. CS is the language, and then HTML is what we're trying to emit. So this is going to be a markup file that we can add code to. And for the view, all I'm going to do is borrow our content from the existing index.html page. That'll be a good start for us, at least. In this first page, let's include our first bit of server-side markup code, or what's called razor. Razor uses the @ symbol to define that it wants to write some code or some extensions for us to inject some code here. And so inside these curly braces is actually just C# code. So I could say int x equals 0. I could say var foo equals hello. It's just C# code, and in here I'm defining some variables. But that's not really what we want to use. We also know that the this for this object is the page or the view that we're on, and it has certain properties that are going to be useful for us. But we're actually going to use a property called a view bag here. And a view bag is a expandable property list, a bag of properties that we can add to. And I'm just going to add one called title. And for my view, I will just call this our homepage. This is important because whether this gets populated here or even back in the controller, I can use this viewbag.title to emit things on the page. And in our case, we're just going to add it to the existing title by using the @ symbol and then just a call to some piece of code. And in our case, this is going to be the view bag. We're getting some complaints about some code, and that's because we haven't actually enabled MVC yet in our project. Even though we have our controller here and we have the index, we are missing some key properties. Let's add those next so we can watch this actually work.